You're listening to the Freedom Army Radio.
Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with the Based Gardener. Our topic is on the cultural differences between first and third world countries in regards to economic freedom and sustainability. So I'm going to start off with the toughest question. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, Mr. Based Gardener?
Yeah, sure. So depending on how deep we want to go here, but so I'm from BC, Canada. I've kind of bounced back and forth through my life between BC and the Yukon. And in terms of my professional life, hasn't been anything too remarkable, but I went to school first for forestry and ended up getting a degree in biology later. And I spent about a decade working for the government. And I left actually during COVID. Uh, I got a little bit, I guess, of a look into the way that government was responding, and it really turned me off of working for government. And so I left with my family and we relocated to southern BC. So now we have 5 acres kind of in the middle of nowhere, just how we like it. And I do a lot of gardening here. It's got a great climate, and I have 3 kids. And so, we're living a really kind of not quite off grid, but back in the sticks, kind of disconnected from society, and it's just great.
I love that, and I'm jealous. I wish I did as well, but I've lived most of my life in southern Ontario, which is not so exciting. I can tell you that. So, what kind of professional goals or dreams do you have at this point?
Well, I mean, if I'm being honest, I would say that COVID kind of precipitated a bit of a, I don't know if you'd call it a midlife crisis or an existential crisis, something along those lines, where I've really had to reevaluate what's important and what I want to do. And I'm still kind of on that journey of figuring out what I want to do. The main thing I decided was I don't want to work for government anymore. And so
Makes sense.
I've yeah, so I've bounced through a bunch of different jobs here. I'm trying to find stuff that works, but at this point, I'm really trying to lean into to seeing what we can grow and produce on our property, and yeah, so that's what I'm focusing most of my efforts on right now, and we're managing to pay the bills. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
That's pretty cool. Last summer, for the first time in my life, I did gardening myself, and I grew peppers and tomatoes and cucumber. Yeah, there's nothing like eating the food that you grew with your own labor and love. It's actually amazing, and to think like, oh, I didn't have to pay for this. That's such a cool feeling.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Are you planning to do more this coming season and expand your operations a little, or?
Yep, definitely. It was pretty successful. I think we did some tomatoes in a pot, but they just didn't work out so great. They kind of peeled, they kind of split and didn't grow right. So maybe they need to be right in the ground. I'm not sure. I'm learning, right?
Yeah, it's quite the learning curve, and I mean I most certainly am learning as well. I have some family members who were really talented gardeners, and I've tried to take a bit of inspiration from that, but also applying some of the things that I learned in forestry and ecology generally. And so what I'm doing is kind of more of a permaculture style. So really what I'm doing here is I've just taken the ground as it is and tried to increase the bioproductivity and throughout the whole area. And so I've got lots of fruit trees and lots of shrubs and berries and things like that, like perennials. Uh,
Nice.
and so yeah, it's satisfying, and it's kind of neat to just watch the whole piece of land just slowly change over time. So it's a bit of experimenting, but lots of setbacks. I've had lots of mortality from various things, and of course you're spending money on these trees and things, and so but yeah, isn't that just how it goes?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I love doing gardening and growing my own food and everything. And I don't know why more people don't do it. You know, we all complain about the grocery prices, but everyone's got a backyard that they could be doing this in at least.
Yeah, that's really how I look at it too. And I mean, as I'm sure we'll get into as Canada, continues its free fall right now, I think that these are skills that people are just going to have to start leaning into a little bit more, right? Like that's something that happened in Russia, during the fall of the Soviet Union as well as just, and I think even prior to that, it was very common for people to keep a garden. And my wife's family is Russian, and so we hear a little bit about the gardening they're doing, and it's just a very commonplace. Everybody, they either have their own garden or they have like a community garden somewhere close by, and it's just a way to grow fresh healthy food and have a bit of additional food security.
Yeah, it seems like a totally normal, natural thing to do, and really surprised that it's not as popular here in Canada. But it is what it is. So what I think we'll do is play a fun game of true or false. So I'm going to ask you a true or false question. You tell me what it is and why. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So first question: true or false? Most Canadian households have fewer than three people living in them.
Yes, true.
It is true, according to StatsCan. The average household size is 2.4, and solo living is now at 14% of adults and dwindling. Why do you think this is? And do you think this is a good or bad thing for the Canadian economy?
Yeah, so sorry, just to get this straight. So there's 14% of households are a single person, and that number is declining.
Yes.
Yeah, so well, like the picture is kind of complicated, right? Because you've got for instance young people are continue with this trend of like staying at home longer, right? So a lot of young people are living with their parents. And I think, as is no surprise, as the cost of living skyrockets, it becomes more and more difficult to maintain a household as an individual. So I would argue that by and large, it's a good thing that people are coming together. Also, um, loneliness is a real problem for a lot of people, especially men, right? And so I think that people coming together is a good thing, but I also think that it does put Native Canadians at a disadvantage, right? And again, I'm sure we'll get into this, but because we're always taught, we're an individualistic society, and we're taught that it's kind of a mark of honor to maintain your own household. But that is just so difficult for most people these days. It's breaking our backs, and so I think it is a good thing that more people are choosing to live in households with others.
It certainly can be, but it's not great if we're forced to. If it was our choice, maybe that would be a bit better, but maybe it'll be for the best in the long run. All right, here's question number 2 for you. Coming in hot. True or false?
Woo!
True or false? In India, the average family size is around 5.
That is true from my understanding.
Yeah, these aren't really questions to trick you up, but these are, it shows the difference. It's quite a difference. They have over a billion people there, and we have only 40 million here. And the demographics are changing, the trends are changing. We're becoming more like they are. So I just want to say, let's talk about that, like the difference in the culture between. In India, it would be not normal for you to send your kid out at 18 to go make their way. It's common that they make sure that they're completely set up or married or have what they need, and they stay in the household together for a long time. This does build stronger bonds, but they are living on top of each other. That has got to be stressful. What do you think?
Yeah, I would totally agree. This is kind of a big driver of why I think about this stuff, because while I recognize that it is absolutely a positive for most Indian families that they live in this manner, and and other families as well, whatever non-Indian families who are living in this manner, there's a lot of positives, but it also does go against the general grain of our Western society, which is a lot more focused on individual accomplishment. And
Right.
so I would say that like in India, in a country that populous and that has a history of more poverty and and more densely populated urban areas, of course it makes sense to live that way. The problem really is that when you're looking at the demographic picture that exists in Canada, it really makes things tough for our young people and for everybody, not just young people, because when folks are coming in right now, we're building on average about 250,000 houses a year, which sounds pretty good. But then when you look at all the various streams of immigration coming into Canada, what you end up with is that you're having far, far more people coming in than the available housing supply and the rate that we're building housing at. And so it like you said previously, and I agree with this, it's forcing people to live in this way just to be able to have access to the housing market. And that puts our people at a disadvantage because, again, we are more inclined to live in small households, whereas folks coming into the country, not only do they get a slew of supports from the government, but they're also more inclined to live in these larger housing situations. So, if you cram 8 people into a house and everybody's making minimum wage, they can live like kings just because of the fact that they're dividing those costs up among so many people.
Yeah, no, you're right. And one of the main cultural differences between Canada and India is here we have shelters, right, for to help out, but they're mostly drug dens, and it's people that are kind of, I don't know, they're really down on their luck. They're in a bad way. But if you look in India, they don't really have that sort of thing. What they have is ashrams, and there's no drugs. You won't find people strung out on drugs in ashrams. It's like a shelter, but you do a little bit of help. You clean a little bit, you cook a little bit, you sweep the floor, you meditate, you do some yoga. It's all about healthy living and feeding the soul. And everybody that's there, genuinely, from what I've seen, they seem very happy. And you go to a Canadian shelter, they're not happy. you know
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Hey, I mean, I think one of the things that's important to touch on when we have these discussions is just that, a lot of the time when you talk negatively about immigration, the first accusation that's going to get leveled against you is racism, right? And I think, like, as I'm sure you're in the same boat. Like, I have a ton of appreciation for Indian culture, and I think that in many ways we're lucky here because Indian culture can integrate into Canadian culture more successfully than I think some other places, like for instance, the demographic picture that exists in like the UK and France and stuff. In many ways, we're lucky in that way here that, there's a lot of second and third generation Indians that are very, patriotic Canadians and whatnot. But the problem is numbers, right? And so like you mentioned about the ashram and like, and people living there, like they've kind of incorporated that into their culture, and with those population numbers, you kind of need to come up with those kind of alternate living arrangements. But this is a
exactly.
new problem for Canadians, right? And
Yeah.
it goes really against the grain of how we've been raised, how we've been taught what we consider to be success as Canadians. And so you can kind of see that not only are there's all these other problems with drugs and people kind of having personal issues in their lives, but it's also just like considered a big personal failure to not be able to compete in the housing market.
Right. Yeah. No, there is a lot of pressure on young people, especially, to get out there, get a job, and then buy that house, which is becoming just a dream at this point that is turning into a nightmare, really, because I don't think anybody who's 20 or 25 now is seriously looking at buying a house. Like, I don't know where you're getting the wage to do that.
Yeah, one of the places I worked recently was a lumber mill close by where I live, and I had the opportunity to work with a lot of just fantastic young people, like some of the hardest working, most well intentioned like just kind, nice, great people. But I really felt for them, because absolutely every single one of them were maxing out their credit cards and spending every available penny just to be able to keep a roof over their heads and
Yeah.
maintain some level of you know happy, healthy lifestyle, to whatever degree they could afford it. And it's painful to see because they have to put all their dreams and ambitions on hold, and they can't afford to lose a job. And that ends up creating a lot of negative environments in terms of their workplace, and so people are getting taken advantage of. It's sad.
And that's a perfect segue to my next question. True or false? Housing costs in Canada now eat up over half of what a young person earns.
I believe that's true as well, sadly.
It is up to 60% or even more in some cases, especially like Toronto and Vancouver, of course. Anywhere really is almost impossible to live. I mean, even if you're on disability in Canada, the entire paycheck does not cover the cost of any rent anywhere. Is that not insane or what? Like, I don't know how people are surviving. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. I mean, what is it? There's a quote about that. Like, you can judge a society by how it treats its most vulnerable, right? And that's disability is a measure of precisely that. And although I'm not necessarily saying that everybody is owed a free lunch. Disability is meant to take care of our society's most vulnerable. And if that doesn't even allow them the wiggle room to be able to pay for just their housing alone, what kind of lives are we expecting them to maintain?
Yeah, it's a crisis, no doubt. And, I read that in Canada, the definition of poverty is when your expenses for housing exceed 30% of your income. That's laughable. I grew up working my ass off at dumb odd jobs, and I never had more than 10, maybe 20% of my income as disposal if I worked overtime or something, but then they still slash you with taxes.
Yeah, well, I just saw recently. I don't know if you've heard of this metric, but there's this thing called the Laffer curve, and so the Laffer curve is like a measure of when you can increase taxes to a certain point, and when you reach that point on the Laffer curve, you actually get diminishing returns, and you start to get less money back the more you
The more you
you
work, yeah.
increase your taxes. And Canada's already levied almost every single one of our taxes has hit the Laffer curve point because they've been so greedy, so that now they're left in a position where to increase taxes further, they're going to get decreasing amounts of money back just because of the disincentive that it provides to people continuing making more income. So if there maybe that's a positive, maybe there's a silver lining there, because it means that the government knows they can't continue increasing taxes forever. But it's a pretty sad state of affairs if our government has maxed out the amount that they can tax us in pretty much every single domain.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people can relate to the idea that, you're just going to your job because they pay you just enough to keep coming back, right? It's kind of a sad situation. And could you make an argument that Canada is going down the road of slave wages or even slave labor, but without the nasty stick that beats you into compliance? It's like the nicest form of slavery.
Yeah, I've heard that argument made. There's a few folks I've heard make a similar argument to that it's actually kind of we exist as some kind of modern serfdom, even, yeah, as slaves. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, consider, for instance, just all the additional bills that keep coming up, right? Like, if you look back a couple of generations, there was no such thing as a cell phone bill, right? And so now people are paying cell phone bill, they're paying a home internet bill. Um, like the rate at which we're charged for insurance has absolutely skyrocketed. And they keep charging for things that used to be free, right? Like, of course, like, people didn't used to pay for parking. Now you pay for parking absolutely everywhere. There's a lot of buildings that just to enter them now, in a lot of cities, you have to pay a fee. And it just doesn't stop. And I do think that's an appropriate comparison in a lot of ways. It's really sad. And then the saddest part is that so many people aren't even aware that they're that they've essentially become something like a slave to the government. It is sad.
Yes, humans are good at adapting to suffering. I find it's a psychological trait that I think keeps us alive, but it doesn't stop us from having potentially a miserable life. You know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if there's one thing that I think is odd about Canadians is we do have this tendency to compliance and you know, whereas like, you know, you look at the French, for instance, right? Like they jump up and protest at the drop of a hat. And I
Right.
think maybe we could use a little bit of that spirit sometimes.
Definitely. I mean, we got French Canadians here, but why aren't they, why aren't they taking to the streets like they should be?
Yeah,
Set the
maybe a
example
few.
for it.
Exactly, right? A few too many generations have passed or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, we've become conditioned. We're sleepy sheep here. It is what it is, right? What can we do?
Yep.
That brings me to my next question, a little different, but it's about zoning laws. True or false? Zoning laws make it illegal to build a second house on your own land without a permit.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I've heard of that, especially in regard to like the GTA and some of these big metropolitan areas. I know folks get away with it a bit in my neck of the woods, just because it's largely, you know, unsupervised. There's really nobody checking. But then if you go to sell, you're going to end up having problems. So I think that's true as well.
Which is crazy. And it just makes you wonder, like, you save up money your whole life just for a down payment on a house. And then the government tells you you don't really own that house. You don't really own the land. You can't dig into the land. You can't build something. You can't even build a second house. So, do we really own anything, or do you just rent space from the bank with the government's permission?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's been a number of things that have happened recently. I'm sure you're aware, and many others that have called into question the very existence of property rights in Canada. And
Yeah,
yeah, and I think you know, there's also a lot of talk about you know, a bunch of fiat currencies being kind of rug pulled, and you know, banks taking back a bunch of assets. And you know, I can't pretend to understand the minutiae of it, but it's just another thing that I think is challenging the idea of property rights. And that's scary. I mean, that's supposed to be absolutely core to a functioning democratic society. And I think we're realizing increasingly that yeah, the wool's been pulled over our eyes and the rug's been pulled out from under us.
absolutely. And we kind of touched on this question, but true or false, if you move out at 18 and live alone, you're statistically more likely to end up in debt than if you stayed home.
I believe that's true as well.
Yes. According to StatsCan, 8,200 plus non-mortgage debt payments early on. Multi-gen homes cut costs 30 to 40%. So having multiple generations in your house is absolutely practical and maybe even necessary now. So, let me ask you, what is the deal with our culture in Canada suggesting that you can leave at 18 years old? This is just ridiculous nowadays. Just go out, get a job, anything, and everything's going to work out for you. Like, I'm a living testament that this is not true. I've been there. I've worked my ass off, and I've worked even 60 hours a week at times. And obviously, that a lot of that got eaten up by taxes, and I got really nothing to show for it. No matter how hard uh, many people in this country work, they will never afford a home, and they will never afford the family that they need and want and deserve. Do you concur?
Yes, I really couldn't agree more. And I've seen it many times myself as well. You know, the only reason I was able to escape from that at all is because I lived in a little bubble within a bubble, which is Whitehorse, Yukon, and kind of at a very specific moment in time as well, where you know, there's all this funding that's available for school, which I took advantage of, and I got it. I got really lucky to get into a program that actually paid for my school, and I had to go on EI in order to qualify for it. And so, like, basically, I got a bunch of kind of little like handouts provided to me from the government, and really was the only reason that I was able to go to school and get lucky enough to get a job when I did. But even then, you know, up there they call it the golden handcuffs, because once you end up working for the government, um, you know, it becomes really difficult to leave. Those skills are not transferable. You know, working as a bureaucrat for Yukon government does not leave you with like a suite of skills that you can transfer to other parts of the country. And so, you know, speaking for most, you know, what I've seen at least of most Canadians, I really do think that and and I think this is borne out by the stats as well, that we've seen this precipitous drop in our standard of living, in our economic opportunities, the jobs that are available to us. And the deeper you look into that picture, you can see all the levers that government has been pulling that have created this situation for us. And I think it's absolutely unforgivable. And yeah, I absolutely concur.
Yeah, it seems like, we're conditioned in a certain way because of the effect or the residual effect of the 50s and 60s, when in this country and in America especially, you could work a job, just father of the household, and you'd have enough for college tuition for your kids. You'd have the white picket fence, the dog, the car, you'd have it all. And that was just a unique era in in a small part of the world, really, for a short time. It was never like that before anywhere else. That kind of wealth was created basically because of the aftermath of World War II and the position that America put themselves in. But those decades are so far gone, and yet the world, at least on this side, is still acting like it's 1950, and all you need to do is just work a job, and that's just not true. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you say there. It was this unique moment in time, and I think in many ways, like, there's a few reasons why that makes things so difficult for people now. Because for one, there's always this expectation that if you have kids, you're going to be able to give them a little bit more than you had, right? And that feels like the right thing to do as a parent, and that's become almost impossible for most folks these days. So that's this expectation gap, right? That's a huge problem, and it's not good for people's psychology, and then at the same time, like, I think you'll notice, like, even if you do travel to third world countries, yes, people live a much reduced standard of living, but they're also not being, you know, um, they're not being coerced into paying constantly for absolutely every single thing that they have. You live a meager existence. You may be hand to mouth, but you're not being levied a tax, just for walking outside and whatever, trying to get to work in the morning. Whereas here, it's like you say, right? There's still this idea that we're living in this golden era, but we're not, and we're paying like we still live in that golden era, and that is, again, it's breaking the backs of a lot of Canadians.
Absolutely. Here's an interesting question. True or false? The government can solve our problems if we elect the right people.
Well, after a lot of reflection on that, at least under the current system as it exists today, yeah, I would have to say that it's false, because there's nobody available. We haven't had anybody to really even acknowledge the seriousness of the situation that we're in and the multitude of problems that we're facing. And so, if they can't address it, then the chances of them being able to solve it are zero. And so, we can't vote our way out of this, at least not right now.
No, and it's just, politics are so controlled. It's such theater. Like, I personally believe we have a uniparty that is controlled mostly by foreign interests. I don't know if you remember, but during the election last year, they had advertisements on the TV for the debate, right? And they had all the leaders on there, but the one they left out was Max Bernier. And there was clearly a spot on the advertisement where Max could have been, and he could have been in the debate too. They just didn't want him there. It would have been a real, actual spicy debate if he was there. But they put two Green Party members just at the end of the advertisement. It's like you gave a whole extra person to the Green Party instead of just throwing Max in there. And I think that was done intentionally to leave him out of it, because he's a threat to the establishment.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, what a big part of what I think you can distill a lot of our problems in the Western world down to is that there's like an elite consensus, and then there's a social consensus, like a societal consensus, and they're so far apart now. And when it comes right down to it, the elite, all throughout history, basically 100% of the time are going to get what they want, until you end up in a situation where there's a revolution or something. And so the elite will ensure that, anybody who is going against the elite consensus is going to be stripped of their power, or much worse, depending on where and when.
Yeah, 100%. It is an unfortunate situation. Here's my next question. True or false? You can legally hunt and fish for your whole family's food without a license, but only if you're indigenous.
Yeah, I believe that's true. It might differ in some parts of the country, but as far as I'm aware, that's probably true. It may even be true for Indigenous people from the States or what have you.
Well, let me know what the situation is in BC with the native population. See, I am ignorant on these issues because, like I said, I lived most of my life in Southern Ontario and I barely ever saw a native. It's just different worlds, really. Do you think that it's right that although I'm born in Canada on this land and I don't know anything else, that somehow a native has more rights to the land than I do? I don't feel guilty, but I do understand that our government treated them very horribly for many years. There's no doubt about that. But things have changed, and it just doesn't make sense to me that I can't live a sustainable life on land I was born without the government interfering. Like, why is my Canadian citizenship not enough?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's such a complicated issue, and to
It
me,
is.
it's one of a host of issues that I think challenge the very sovereignty of our nation. I really think that it does, and so I'll explain why. So BC is unique in that here we all of our First Nations have not signed treaties, so they're all unsigned First Nations, and so what that means is that there's all these active court cases against the government, and so already, even if you strip that away, all these unceded First Nations, and I believe throughout the province there's like 200 or something. I don't remember the full number, but anytime there's some kind of a resource development project or what have you, it has to go through these various First Nations. A lot of their territories are overlapping, and so it makes it extremely difficult. If you have a project that spans a larger area, you may have to consult with, 5 or 6 Indigenous bands, and they essentially have a veto. It's not recognized that way, but in practice, that's how it works. And so whereas I absolutely acknowledge that yes, bad things happened. There were downsides to residential schools, although there on the flip side, there were also a lot of people who had great experiences. There's a lot of things that people don't recognize, like for instance, the Kamloops Indian Residential School. If you look at pictures of that school, this is the one where there was the 215 graves that were claimed to have been found there. Well, if you look at pictures of
Right.
it when it was operating, there was a swimming pool. Now, you don't tend to build swimming pools. Like I don't think, you look back to, whatever concentration camps and places where they're exterminating people, that you would put a swimming pool into a place like that. And there's other things like they did exchange trips. So there's pictures of a lot of the residents of that same school who did a cultural exchange down to Mexico, and they were playing sports and everybody was dressed really nicely. Now, again, that's not to say that there weren't abuses that happened, but the idea of like some intentional genocide perpetrated by priests and nuns at this beautiful school, like I mean, the schools themselves too were absolutely some of the finest architecture in our province. So it's a complicated picture, and I don't mean to suggest that there isn't some manner of recompense that is required from this. But what I would say is that the situation as it stands now is untenable. Kamloops received $12 million for the purposes of excavating the area where they suspected there was graves found. To date, they have not put a single shovel in the ground. And recently, there was just a letter that was sent out by the band, explaining away why they didn't do any of this. And at the same time, it's come out that there was another $12 million that was provided to create like a healing lodge to help people deal with the aftermath of these 215. Likely non-existent. I say likely because we just don't know, but all evidence points to that these are just like ground penetrating radars not capable of defining the detail to the level of bones, right? So all it is anomalies, and these anomalies are more than likely septic tiles, because there was a septic field there, and some of the site has already been excavated, and so they were able to say conclusively that like something like 30 of these anomalies were definitely septic tiles. And so it stands to reason that the rest of them may very well be the same. Now, that doesn't mean I keep an open mind, and it's quite possible that there could be a body that gets discovered there, or a bone or something, but there hasn't been anything found so far. So all this to say that you know we Canada has a complicated history with our indigenous population, and yes, BC. It is true that you can call it unceded territory, but I prefer the stance of parties like One BC who say, you know what, we're done with identity politics. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. We're all struggling. We all need to support one another, and the best way to do that is not to look at your genetics to determine how much support and the government is going to provide to us. In my
We're all human, right? At the end of the day, we're all human. I don't think this is practical, but it would be nice if we didn't have borders, maybe. If we just kind of, I mean, that's a perfect utopic world, perhaps, but it's these differences that tear us down and rip us apart and divide us when we're just all here on this land trying to survive like anybody else. We should be working together. So let me ask you this then. Do you think natives today should have a green card or they should not pay taxes?
I personally am I prefer the idea of essentially just stripping away the Indian Act entirely and just treating people as Canadians. Now, maybe what we for those who choose to go this route, perhaps you could still have reservations that if people want to have a band provided house or something, we could maintain that system. But I would say that going forward, if we're going to do that, we need to get rid of this traditional territory idea that they get voting rights as to every single resource project that is proposed in an area, because that's not fair to everybody else. If you're going to get funding from the government and free housing and this kind of thing, then it should be confined to the reservation, I think.
That's probably one of the most complex and convoluted issues in this country, and I really don't have all the answers. It's like no matter what you do, someone's going to be pissed, right?
Yeah, yeah, there's no way of stepping over that issue without walking on hot coals. It is incendiary, and like I say, I think it just another thing that threatens the sovereignty of our country. Because if it continues going the way it is right now, um, something's just got to give, because an economy can't keep chugging along with a 10-year waiting process before any project gets developed, because it has to get bounced around across all these unelected tribal chiefs. It just doesn't make
Hmm.
sense.
A lot of things don't make sense with this government, but here we are. Next question: true or false? Bit of a different one here. Looking to the future, technology will help build sustainable systems for all.
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I don't know. I mean, I do like the idea that you know humanity is this interesting symbiosis between like the natural and the uniquely human, the technological. And so I am a fan of like applying technology to natural systems, and just seeing how much flourishing can result from that. But at the same time, because I don't have a ton of knowledge about a lot of obviously the main one coming down the pike right now is AI. And
Yeah, for sure.
it's really two directions it could go, right? It's either going to be like Skynet, or it's going to be something that actually really does increase productivity and gives us all like some kind of a universal high income. And I'm a kind of open minded to both of those possibilities.
Well, let me tell you my theory. This is the potential I see in the future, um, with AI especially. If we had an intelligent government, we would be building systems already utilizing AI to solve some of the various problems and challenges of the country. For example, healthcare. The number one expense for healthcare is administration, right? And often when you call a doctor, they often say, "Oh, you only get one question per visit," or if you have two questions, you got to hang up and call back, and then it takes a month, and then you got to book another appointment. It's quite ridiculous, and it actually leads to more people having emergencies or serious problems down the line, because we're not proactive about healthcare here at all. We have an emergency system. So imagine calling Service Canada helpline or a healthcare helpline, and any customer support line basically. And instead of getting some Indian who doesn't speak English or understand our culture, you'd get an automated machine that could actually speak any language perfectly and honestly solve your problems very effectively if the system was set up to do that. AI could already do that today. We just haven't built that system. Would we lose jobs? Perhaps. Or would those jobs just be migrated to some other industry that is being created by that technology?
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I mean, it makes me think of that movie Office Space. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie before.
One of my favorites, bro.
It's
One of my
great, right?
favorites.
It's great. And I mean, the reason it makes me think of that is because a lot of those jobs, like if you're doing hospital admin and stuff, it's soulless work. Like if we can get rid of some of those jobs, replace that with AI, and still find a way to keep cranking out enough productivity that like we can maintain or perhaps increase our standard of living, then I see that as being a positive too. Like humans aren't meant to be sitting behind a cubicle, in a bad mood 8 hours a day, like answering calls from people who are angry and upset because they've got health issues, whatever. So there's absolutely some positives to that, and that's one of the more optimistic takes I've seen on AI for sure. Is that like, what, it'll free us up to actually fulfill our individual potential and just offload a lot of the work that really nobody wants to do onto computers. And so yeah, that sounds good.
I agree. I'm going to take a 5-second break, okay?
Sounds good.
There. Just needed to crack my beer.
Very nice.
Yeah, have you heard of this new AI software, I guess you call it, that Elon Musk has just unveiled called Macro Hard?
I've heard a little bit about it, but you'll have to fill me in on the detail.
It's really quite revolutionary. This could be the thing that changes the whole world the most. It's a play on the company Microsoft, because what does Microsoft make? It makes programs for big companies to save them money. And they did that, right? With spreadsheets and Excel. This was a huge time and money saver for companies. And all companies basically had to adapt to this, or they just wouldn't be competitive. So macro hard is this idea that instead of having like a boardroom with a bunch of executives and a bunch of people on payroll and an HR department and all that, the entire company would literally be run by AI. Everything. Isn't that insane?
Wow. You know what? I gotta say, I love the macro hard. I had no idea that it was in reference to Microsoft. That is so funny.
It is, yeah.
I love
He's
that.
clever, isn't he?
Oh, it's great. I love it. Yeah, and it takes balls to just keep putting out these funny ideas. I love it. I mean, you know, what I've been putting a lot of thought into what's the future going to look like if there's AI, and to me, it's like, again, it's like the idea that we can fulfill our own individual potential because a lot of the boring menial stuff we don't want to do is taken care of. Like that really does sound like a positive. For me, I don't know if you're probably like this too, just as a thinker. I there's not enough hours in the day. I have too many hobbies, too many things that I want to do. And so, no, at least for me, if I have more time freed up that I can devote towards those things, then hey, I'm happy.
Yeah, and I think the idea is like it's there's no doubt that it will drop production costs, maybe even 1,000%. And I just can't even imagine what the world will look like. Everything will change, And I have you heard of the concept of a singularity?
Yeah, is that similar to like the idea that when AI achieves consciousness or something?
Basically, like AGI, artificial general intelligence, is basically step one of this. And because it self teaches and it can grow at exponential rates, like humans cannot compete with this. And it will essentially take over and push us into, well, either Skynet or some sort of golden age. And it's all, I don't think anybody can answer what's really coming, because these technologies are so powerful, unlike anything. It's like we are really reinventing fire in the wheel here.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I do like to be optimistic, right? Like I've got kids, and I mean, to me, the world is right now, things are dark, especially for Canadians. Things are dark, and there's just no sugarcoating that. But that doesn't mean that if we don't keep our backs up, stay strong, stay focused, and try to make the right decisions. And I think that's what a lot of it is about right now. It's just like, don't get sucked into bad ideas or losing your head. Keep your eye on the prize, and a marvelous future may very well unfold itself before our eyes, but it's up in the air right now. But those things do give me pause and make me think that, hey, you know what? It's not all doom and gloom. Like there's definitely some bright things on the horizon as well.
And that leads me to my last question: true or false? This is really just your opinion. Eco friendly, sustainable living is the future, or we won't have one.
Well, I mean, the only problem I see with that is just what does eco mean, right? If you
Hmm.
if you go by what a lot of the let's call it like the green industry is saying right now, it's all this basically like decarbonizing, deindustrializing stuff that like it's just clearly doesn't make any sense, especially because a lot of parts of the world, they're just not going to do it. It doesn't matter how loud Greta Thunberg screams from their podium at Davos or whatever. They're
Right.
just not going to do it. But what I do think is that, as I said before, and this is kind of central to me. Like I have a tattoo on my arm that I got when I was a teenager, and was just kind of thinking about this idea. And it's a root and a road kind of entangled together like a double helix, like DNA. And it's exactly that idea that I was describing of like, to me, that's a big part of what humanity is. We're at once a part of nature and yet separate from it. And this idea of like, the technologies that have allowed us to master so much of our physical environment is kind of wired right into our DNA. And so in that way, I do see that even if we end up becoming a multiplanetary species, right? Like, can you imagine, if you're living on Mars and all you see every day is like the Martian soil and, you know, how nice it would be to have like some trees and some house plants and, and whatever, like be able to pick some fresh berries and stuff like that, right? Like, I don't think we're ever going to lose our connection to the natural world. And I think that there's also like a lot of biotechnology that is going to allow us to again like kind of propel ourselves into that marvelous future where it's a mix of the natural and the human. And I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like I'm not suggesting that we tax the shit out of our citizens for government policies or ideologies like net zero, where you're not allowed to have petroleum products anymore. You can't have a coal factory. Like, this goes down the whole rabbit hole of is climate change real? Which I just did an interview the other day on that, and you know, like one of the things I'll say is like it doesn't make sense for countries in the UK, for example, who are pushing concepts like net zero for the good of the planet, eco friendly. It sounds nice. It's easy to sell that idea when their output of CO2 is like less than 0.1% of the entire planet. And at least 40% of that is coming from China, which, like you say, they're not going to play ball. They're not going to change their system. They're not going to stop building coal factories. So, I guess maybe multiplanetary systems and AI will just override this and build these systems. Like there's already companies out there that have major facilities that pull CO2 out of the air and put it underground in a harder format. Things like this, I think, are going to change the world. And maybe it's not even going to be government policies anymore. It will just be technology because I don't see how else it can go down. Like China's not going to play ball, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and this is one of these things that is scary because there's these different visions of the world right now, right? Like, I think kind of China represents one stream of that, and America another. And right now, at least, it's really hard to see how those visions are going to gel together without conflict emerging. And I actually am hopeful in a lot of ways because, this not to get off track here, but just I think there's this idea of kind of like a stable multipolarity could very well exist, because in many ways like the American system and the Western system, if you will, and the Chinese system kind of complement each other in various different ways. And so if we can manage to get past these next few years without a big conflagration, things may very well stabilize. And under that paradigm, like, yeah, I do think we absolutely do need to stop destroying the natural world, right? That part of it is just unquestionable. You see in massive garbage patches. Like I've been to some countries where it's just, there's just garbage everywhere, and and we're polluting waterways. There's the rate of extinction of species is far higher than it should be, and so I think we have a lot of work to do on that front. But I think as you're mentioning, like technology has a big part to play in that as well, and so yeah, I'm hopeful in that regard too.
Yeah, I think the threat of environmental sustainability not looking good in the future is far less. It's a far less threat than the very present real threat of economic sustainability. People are struggling in the pocket. They're just struggling to buy houses, as we mentioned, struggling to buy food. And that's not because the planet is so unhealthy. That's not because of the environment being trashed. That's because of government policies and just the way the world is, fiat currency running amok. So I think, as a species, we're going to have to ask big questions, especially when technology changes the game. And we got to say, like, can we build a world that is both sustainable from an environmental perspective, which I think it already is. I don't think it's as bad as people say, but I think it's much worse economically than people want to admit. And that could be our ruin if we don't take it seriously.
I 100% agree with you. And actually, that was one thing I wanted to mention, and it's a perfect opportunity to do that. Which is, I heard a great question posed today, and this was by an economist who really thinks outside of the box on economic issues. And it's a question he asks to people a lot, and it's a very difficult question to answer. It's just something that we take for granted. It's so fundamental to to economics, to the way we look at economics, and that is, what is GDP for? And just hearing it to me, it's like, yeah, it's interesting. It's like it's like the ether. It's the water you swim in. You don't bother even thinking about it. But really, like, what is it for? Why are we trying to grow the economy? Who's benefiting? Are our lives getting better as our economy grows? And I think most of us intuitively now have this answer already formed, that no, it's not. Clearly, when we see that the wealth gap is just increasing and increasing, and everyday life is becoming more and more expensive, something is broken. And so economically, we need to fix whatever is broken. And I it's going to take some very smart people to to start to come up with some answers to that. But yeah, I like that question. Right, what is GDP for?
I have one possible solution. I can't think of any others because it is a complex issue. But what if instead of having fiat currency, like every country just has a central bank that prints money based on the demand, or whatever they think they need to do to balance the market, but it never works, and there's booms and busts, and like 2008 crash. This is because of corruption and greed in the market. Um, but just give me a second, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
But my dog is doing something. One sec. Yeah. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, if we had a basket of commodities that we based our currency on, like in Canada, we have lumber, we have gold, we have oil, we have a lot of things. We have uranium. Actually, we have a lot of uranium. There's so many things that we could build a strong dollar around. And I think, on a side note, if Alberta separated, they could do this. They could show the world that their labor and their commodities and their hard work is what backs their currency. They would have the strongest middle class and the strongest dollar in the world. They would crush the US dollar if they did this. Because again, the US dollar maybe is the reserve currency and makes up 40% of the world's money supply, but it's horrendously indebted. It's been downgraded by Moody's rating agency to a double A instead of triple A. So, and that's a big deal. If the world doesn't think that America can pay its debts, how do they afford all the military bases when their currency collapses?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like the idea of that too, like having like an actual backed currency again. Like, obviously they used to have the gold standard, and maybe you could have something where it's like like you say, kind of like a bundle of different backings or whatever, based on whatever the resources that you produce locally. I mean, I think the other big part of that needs to be contended with is, of course, the banks, right? Because the banks are essentially predatory across the Western world right now. Well, across the entire world throughout human history. But right now, as you know, I'm sure you've heard whisperings of this too, but there's a lot of talk of like a bunch of the banks kind of rug pulling fiat currency and leaving us all in the lurch, and basically vacuuming up all these assets that they've used to back all the different stocks and stuff. And so, you know, if we could have a more resilient dollar that's actually based on something tangible, and if we, you know, and maybe AI could serve this function in some way to help regulate the level of corruption that's happening in financial services and banks and stuff, would be really nice.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to finish off with a question for you. You had mentioned in the chat there that your family or something, you have to fill me in. I don't know all the details. You have some sort of sustainable living farm or eco-friendly situation that your parents were involved with. Tell me the story.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'll get into that. So my parents, this was gosh, so I guess this must have been in the early 80s, 83, 84, or something like that. They ended up living in this beach community, just basically a beach squat called Sombrio Beach. So that's on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Very rugged place. At the time, there was no road access. There was only a trail that went in there, and it was about an hour hike from the logging road. And so a lot of people would actually boat in, and a lot of these hippies actually just had canoes, and so they'd be canoeing in the ocean, you know, from Port Renfrew, the nearest town, to get to this little beach squat. And interestingly enough, there was multiple generations that were raised in that little beach squat. And so I wasn't born there, but there was actually one family that raised 11 kids in that very beach squat. And
Damn.
one of the things I found really interesting about it was that it just as a test case, you know, because it wasn't a religious community, it wasn't a cult, it wasn't anything like that. It was basically just a bunch of kind of free thinking hippies. There was quite a few draft dodgers who initially went there because I believe it did start in the late 60s. And just kind of kept on going, and eventually was turned into a national park, the area, and the whole thing got closed down. But it is definitely something that got me interested in, for one, like squatters' rights and kind of alternative living situations that I think right now it really is something that a lot of Canadians are needing to look into, right? Because
I
if your
agree.
choice
Yeah.
is homelessness, or Skid Row, or or maybe building a squat somewhere, that might not be such a bad option, of course. And this is where the squatters' rights piece comes in. I find the way our government deals with these things to be uh, just fundamentally authoritarian and anti-human and wrong,
Yeah.
because I do believe that human beings should have the right to carve out our own little existence from this earth that we live on if we choose to do so, without
Absolutely.
having to take part in this thing we call society.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work for everybody, and if you're down on your luck but you're also willing to put the hard work in to build yourself a little cabin or something, I don't think the government should be able to just come in and tear it down the way that they do. And they do. And it's wrong, my
Yep,
opinion.
I completely agree. The legislation is a trap. We have all this land, all these resources, all this space, and yet we can't build enough houses. We can't build a new town. We can't build eco-friendly farms or sustainable, situations that people who, for whatever reason, they don't even need a reason. If they just want to live free on the land, they should be able to do that if they're born here.
Well, and I can tell you at least the reason I believe that they do it. The reason is because as soon as they do that, people realize you can just do things. If
Yeah,
they let
you're
somebody
free
just go out,
actually.
right? Exactly. If they just let people go out and build a place, and well, they're not paying taxes. They're
Yeah,
not, they're not
that's what it is.
working 9 to 5 constantly to grind out to give more tax to feed the same system that they don't want to be a part of. And I think maybe that's the piece that's going to send that all crumbling down one day. Is that what? In a really free society, we should be able to just do things, and we should have squatters' rights again. Like in the Yukon, there used to be squatters' rights. I believe it only stopped in the 80s or something, maybe the 70s. But a lot of people just went out, built a house, and they were given a parcel of land by the government that they built their property on. And it was usually like 20 acres or so, that it was considered to just be your land because you tended it and you built your house on it. And I think we need to get back to something like that. Of course, you can't do that if you're bringing in 1 million people a year from other countries, but but if we could stabilize things here a bit, I think that would just should be a fundamental right as a Canadian, is to go out, carve your little piece of land out, and without having to owe a giant bill to the man.
Yeah, maybe we need to redefine what freedom is in this country, because we're very conditioned in our cages like rats, and we're basically killing each other over it.
It's so true, right? I mean, that's the thing. That's what's so strange, is that, again, like, because Canadians just haven't had any of these rights in such a long time.
Yeah.
We just it just seems normal to carve off 50% of our paycheck and then get the rest of it sniped away, if we take a trip into town to buy groceries in Park or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not normal. It's not normal for the government to be sucking up every little piece of productivity that we can muster. And it shouldn't be that way. And it's another thing that I think is testing the sovereignty of our nation, because you can only bloat a bureaucracy so much and have so many leeches siphoning off the top, before the whole system just becomes untenable. And I think we're getting close to that point.
Yep. Hopefully, the future is bright, even though it looks dark now. I do stay hopeful, and I really truly am optimistic. If it wasn't for some advances in technology coming, I don't know. I think I would be more pessimistic. But lastly, I just want to give you a chance here, Based Gardener. Take the mic and you tell the world your truth. What is the final message you would like to leave our listeners?
Okay, well, yeah. So, talking about alternative living arrangements. Now, as I was mentioning previously, working with young folks in Canada, and I have some friends with kids who are older, in their teens and stuff. That's a group right now that my heart really goes out to. I think life is really tricky for them. They're seeing the land of their birth become kind of unrecognizable in some ways. But I do think there's hope, and I love what you're saying about that. Hey, you know what? It's not all doom and gloom. There's if you can be creative, if you can be smart, and I think most of us are capable of that, you can come up with something that'll work for you. Okay, and so to me, I think there's a few main things that Canadians can do right now to kind of level the playing field, because yes, there's DEI, there's mass immigration, there's high youth unemployment, but you have your natural faculties, and as a Canadian, you're familiar with the landscape here in a way that others aren't. So there's always, like, going somewhere rural, and even if you can't afford your own place, lots of people who have land, if you make friends with them, they will happily, like, and I can speak for myself in saying that we have somebody living here, on our property, and we charge them a little bit of rent, but it's very little. And and a lot of people are willing to do stuff like that, like, hey, you know what, you come live on our property, we've got a little place here, or somebody might even let you just build a little place on their property. There's options like that. There's also just, like, cohabiting with your friends. Like, I've met some folks who pooled their resources, and instead of trying to buy a house on their own, they bought it with, like, 3 of their good friends. And sure, you might want to get a lawyer to draft up an agreement for you in case things go sideways, but you know what, the housing dream can become a reality, even if it doesn't seem like it. Again, if you get creative, you think outside of the box. Another thing that this is just kind of a personal belief that I have, but looking back through human history, one thing that we've lost in a lot of ways is the kind of idea of, like, a clan family based society. And I think in many ways that it would behoove us to return to that to some degree. And by which I mean, like, really honoring the connections between not just our family, but also our close friends, like, really treating that as, like, kind of an extension of our own families. Because if you can, like, let's say, whatever, buy a house with a good friend, or let's say, you have kids and your kids get married or something like that, and you kind of formalize that family bond. That is something that, again, it's these arrangements are very foreign to us as Canadians, but it used to be something that was very core to how most societies functioned. That goes for business too, starting businesses together with friends and family. And so And one other idea that I've been thinking a bit about that I think is kind of fun is so most of us can't afford to go on vacation anymore, right? But one thing I think that we can do is with the advent of social media, you can reach out to people who live in Britain or Indonesia or South America, wherever it is in the world that you're interested in. And if you can make friends with somebody and get to know them well enough that you build a level of trust, why not do something like pick a time of the year and do like an annual exchange where you fly to their neck of the woods, they fly to your neck of the woods, and you live in each other's houses for a couple of weeks or something like that. So you're not paying all the hotel costs and you've got some local connection and they can, tell you how to go about your day to day there. Um, anyway, so these are the kind of ideas right now that I think that I know for me, I try to embrace. Like we live here with my mom, and she pays for some of the bills and stuff, and we bought the property together. And so, like, the more creative we can be, and just really envisioning our own version of success in life, and then just trying to put the puzzle pieces together to make that a reality. I think we can weather this little storm that we're in right now and come out the other side as a functional society still.
Yeah, in a perfect world, especially when I was a young guy, like I wanted to do this so badly, but it wasn't really possible, and it's still not. Why can't we take our family or our best friends and go out to a lake somewhere in Canada? We have only a billion lakes, and they're untouched, pristine, beautiful sections of our country that we could thrive on. We fish and hunt and build, but we're just not set up for that. And I truly believe that that's living, that's freedom, and that's a good life. And everyone thinks that a pension and benefits is the good life. I just can't get into that.
Amen to that, brother.
But you know what? We'll conclude on that, man. This has been a fantastic interview and conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we can do it again on another topic. With that, I will thank you and say adieu.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It was an excellent conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And if you're ever in BC and this neck of the woods, look me up. You'll always have a place to stay here.
Hey, man, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and take care.
Have an excellent evening, sir.
Good night.